Hey guys, it's me Kevin, and today I am back with another AFL video, and this time I'm going to be talking about the coronavirus effects on the AFL. Just noting, I will do another video on the coronavirus itself in the coming days, but this video is specifically on the coronavirus effects on the AFL and how it's going to affect the AFL. Right, so the coronavirus. It is an economic crisis right now because the stock market has crashed. It's been a horrendous week in Wall Street. All the stocks are going down rapidly. Flights are being cancelled. Major companies like Qantas, basically they're losing a lot of money, and so is the AFL, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, it's not just Qantas and the AFL. Pretty much all companies are losing money right now over the coronavirus, and many jobs are either being lost or being many people working in many jobs have to take time off work, and also schools are likely to be shut down here. So basically, we're in a bit of an economic crisis right now due to the virus. Now today I will be talking about the effects on the AFL due to the coronavirus. So, if you haven't heard, as of recent, the AFL on Friday announced that round one will go ahead, but there'll be no crowds. So, essentially, the only way you can watch an AFL match is on TV. But the AFL also said that should the outbreak get worse, or should a player contract coronavirus, then the AFL season would have to be suspended indefinitely. Now, the AFL being suspended indefinitely is an increasingly likely situation, almost inevitable in the eyes of the AFL. And whilst I don't want to see any games rescheduled, realistically it probably will happen. So today I'm going to be talking about what does the AFL do in terms of its scheduling should a player contract coronavirus, or should the season be suspended. The thing that people need to realise is that with the AFL, if they just ban crowds and play in front of empty stadiums but all games go on as scheduled, then they will be losing money, yes, but the money they will be losing is stadium expenses. They can salvage as much of that as possible on increased broadcasting revenue and television revenue, but at the same time, it's not going to be enough to cover the losses made with stadium arrangements. But if the AFL suspends the season, they're also losing flight costs, broadcast revenue, and even player wages. So the preferable thing is for the AFL to play all 198 plus 9 finals games. Whilst in an ideal world, you want the whole season to go as planned, as scheduled. If the season does get suspended, I'm going to be talking about how I think the AFL should reschedule its matches so that every game can be played. The AFL has talked about fitting in midweek rounds, and basically for that to work, they'd have to top up the lists. Now, I think with the top-up list, they shouldn't just have like one star-studded side and one reserve side. They should have, like, for example, with the Eagles, you have Josh Kennedy and Jamie Cripps on one side, and then Jack Darling and Liam Ryan on another side, and then you fill in with players like Ray Shaw and other rookies that are on the list, just so it's evenly balanced, and so teams aren't at an advantage or disadvantage. The other thing with midweek rounds is that you want as many games as possible to stay as scheduled, mainly due to flights. Yes, you will have to rearrange flights, but you want to try and minimize the rearranging of flights, and the best way to do it is to keep as many rounds as possible as scheduled. So for example, if the AFL goes on as normal until about round 6, and then they have to cancel it, suspend it in round 6, what the AFL would want to do is keep round 1s, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as scheduled, but would pluck rounds from the end of the season and sandwich that between the weekend. So, for example, you would have round 1 on the weekend, round 23 on a midweek slot, then you'd have round 2 at the weekend, and then 22 in the midweek, and then round 3 in the weekend, and so on. What that does essentially is should the AFL be suspended, you have extra space at the end of the season to make up for missed games. Apart from risking losing money on broadcast revenue, the other issue with that is you might have like teams like North Melbourne and Bulldogs playing back-to-back matches under my proposal, but same time, what can you really do? Before I go on to what I think would happen if the AFL does suspend the season mid-season, I just want to clean up a few rounds quickly just to make it easier to reschedule other rounds and to give the season more space for rescheduling. That clean-up means that St Kilda and Port Adelaide would be shifted back to round 11. Yes, I know it was initially played round 11 Sunday in China, then because Marvel Stadium was unavailable, had to move it to round 12. But what they could do, given that I think both teams have a 6-day break, they both play on the Saturday round 10, they could play a Friday night or even potentially a Thursday night match. Now that's if round 11 is played as scheduled, but if not, then they could just have Port and Saints on either Thursday or Friday because Marvel Stadium's available that day. That means round 12 and 13 can be evenly combined with each other, as up on the board. Those would be the matchups for round 12 and 13. That basically gives it more space for the AFL to reschedule rounds. Now, let's say the AFL gets suspended before Anzac round and doesn't get rebooted until round 15, for example. Given that the AFL can play the grand final at the latest, 10th of October, which is basically the second Saturday in October, before cricket commitments have to be played at the MCG. That basically, from round 15 onwards, gives them 16 weeks to fit in 13 rounds. By the way, I'm going off my previous example where 9 rounds is played in 5 weeks. So that would give 16 rounds to play, 13 rounds and 4 finals, which basically means you only have to play 1 midweek fixture, really. But that also means that they won't be the postseason bye, obviously. In that case, most rounds, barring one, can all be played on weekends. And hopefully, if crowds can come back at that point, it could probably salvage some money in terms of stadium renting. Another option is for the AFL just to go on as normal until the season gets postponed, and then once it gets rebooted, try and cramp in the remaining games in the midweek slots. That's another option that the AFL can do. They've really got to weigh up the argument. Does the AFL expect to have crowds back later in the season, in which the earlier suggestion I made would be the most preferable one? Or is the AFL going to be suspended? Are crowds going to be suspended all season, which means that the latter could be beneficial because the AFL wouldn't really want to risk losing any broadcast money, and well, not losing. Of course, it will lose, but I mean like not as much because let's say the first let's just say if the whole season goes through without the coronavirus striking the AFL, all right, if they squeeze some games early and then you have a few weeks off before the finals because the AFL is trying to be precautious. I mean, what will that do? I mean, that they're going to lose broadcast money where they could have had it scheduled on a weekend rather than a midweek slot. So does the AFL want to risk losing revenue to try and expect to see crowds come back later in the season, or does the AFL not want to risk it, play it safe, and take 1 week at a time, and if coronavirus does strike, then reschedule the mismatches later in the season? That's the argument the AFL would have to weigh up. But one thing is almost for certain, though, that the AFL should consider doing is, as I said, move Saints and Port Adelaide back to round 11. Thursday would probably be the best slot. And then combines round 12, 13 and 14 because they fit perfectly. The only real effect that might do is in terms of free-to-air broadcasting, teams might lose their slots on free-to-air. Although, given that you can do 9 free-to-air games in 2 rounds, that is very possible. Especially if there's a Thursday night match on. One more thing. Remember in my previous AFL fixture creation video where I basically had each team play each other once plus a bye in the first 18 rounds and then the last 5 rounds of the double-ups? That's what the AFL should consider doing. Because if something like this ever strikes again, the AFL could just easily cancel the last 4 rounds and they could have the other 18 games, 17 matchups plus their rival twice, by the way, and they're up on the board. But yeah, if something like this ever happens again where the fixture has to be tampered with and they have to cancel the last 4 rounds of the season, then even though they're losing money, it does mean that the AFL would finish fairly. Because right now, if they cancel the last 3 rounds, I mean, what does that mean? The Eagles are going to play Richmond and Geelong twice. They don't even get to play Brisbane and the Bulldogs. You know what I mean? So yeah, the AFL should probably consider doing that every season from now on, in my opinion anyway. So that's it from me. Hopefully the AFL season continues. Not only because I want to watch as much AFL as I can, obviously I do, but also, if they don't, then I do fear for them on an economic perspective, and I feel like the AFL, they're going to lose, what, at least $50 to $100 million at best, if the season gets cancelled. So, hopefully, for both a fan and an economic perspective, the AFL season continues as scheduled, or at least salvaged and rescheduled if necessary. Anyway, I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and please comment what you think of the video down below and how should the AFL and comment how the AFL should get over this coronavirus and work around it. Check out some of my other AFL videos. I'm going to be doing more AFL content and tipping. 2020 AFL tipping will come back, if there is a season anyway. And I'll see you next week. Bye.